Have you ever stopped to think about how much goes into designing a game's puzzles? In this design run, we're going to be delving into the puzzle design in Playdead's Limbo. Again. Because this is part 2. My name is Giddy McD, and this is Design Run, a casual series of videos where we talk about the design of one game in particular. Maybe good design, maybe not so good design. And that is because here on the channel, we talk about the ins and outs of game design and what makes up a game so that you are equipped to analyze, discuss, and create great games. This is where we left off. So while I'm running right, a quick recap. We went over puzzles that taught us how to jump, pull things, push things, and how to interact with rope, including getting on and off. Plus, how many of the features of the level help teach these mechanics. If you haven't seen part 1, link, description, you know the deal. So, the first puzzle for part 2 is this area of spiky ground things. Now, these are spiky, like the spikes from the pits before. So, we probably don't want to jump on them. The positioning here is also important though, because if we decide we want to try and jump over them, we will soon find out that the distance is too wide. Okay, so we need a new approach. Remember what we said before about little handles on things that you can push and pull? Well, you may notice this here. Or perhaps some players will just assume, well, I can't jump over them, so maybe I can grab them. Now, this is where position is important. First of all, after we grab them, we can push the spikes down the hill until they hit this rock. This is fairly close, both in the game and on screen, so if we choose to push them, the action is quickly stopped by the rock and we know it's not the solution. Also, in terms of position, when you grab the spikes, the first part of the spike slides back a little bit. And when you start to push, the first part moves forward slightly and clangs against the second part. They quite easily could have placed them right next to each other, but instead, placing them slightly apart shows us in a few ways that they are actually two pieces. So now knowing that, pulling back will pull the first piece away from the second piece. From here, it's fairly simple to work out. Just pull each one far away enough that you can jump over it individually. And if we revisit the rock's positioning, if you push the traps down the hill and hit the rock, then decide, okay, I'll pull it back, you see that it is in fact two traps, and the physical barrier of the rock help persuade you to pull instead of push. When it comes to game design, all these little things are all helping to communicate the intent. So while players wouldn't even pay a second thought to the slight positional difference or the position of the rock, the clang and the slight difference is telling them a lot about the surroundings. Anyway, onward. So almost immediately, we get to this puzzle. What looks like a delightful hanging carcass suspended from a rope tied to a tree branch. If the player jumps on this rope, they add weight to the branch and pull it down, making this jump impossible. And they aren't going to know that until they jump on the branch, because it looks like you can make this jump before you interfere. The next thing is this vignette. If you remember in the first video, we said this vignette is important to mention. This is the first major puzzle where it's important, because if you try to climb the rope to the top and attempt to jump anyway, or you try to jump this gap quickly before the branch falls, there is a fairly good chance you will end up in this bear trap. But from back here where you start the puzzle, you can't even see it. So you don't know about it until you've started enacting your plan. From here, it's a simple logic puzzle. The form of the hanging object and the buzzing flies implies that it's some sort of dead meat. And if you died on the previous puzzle, you know that bear traps will snap shut. If you didn't die, there isn't much else in the puzzle to interact with other than the bear trap. So it is simply putting 2 and 2 together to move the trap under the carcass and then jump back on the rope to get the bear trap to snap the meat off, allowing the branch to flex back and thus the player to reach a height where they can jump off the rope onto this ledge. Things to note are, there is only a small area where the trap can be moved, so you don't lose the trap or confuse its purpose with another environmental object. Also, the trap is on the right, so the player can pull it without having to jump back over it. But this is likely because of trying to hide it as discussed before. Okay, so we are up out of the pit. And the next puzzle is this. This is really smart. It's a simple avoid getting crushed by the boulder puzzle. The solution looks like this. Pretty simple. Jump on log, realize your terrible judgment has once again put you in mortal peril, go back the way you came. then you can climb over the boulder. But there are still a lot of small design decisions going on here. So the obvious one is probably the little rocks. These are just on a proximity sensor. Get close enough and the rocks will roll down the log. They create movement that draws the player's attention and also alludes to what might be coming, or what that noise might be. The boulder also has some twigs and things sticking out of it, so it is easier to interpret that it is rolling. The boulder rolling is triggered by the boy landing on the log, so the player doesn't just get squashed if they fall in here, and also can't just stop and wait for the boulder to roll down and then jump over it without at least getting in the path of the boulder. But the true genius of this puzzle is this sliding log. The sliding log creates the effect of going up an escalator backwards. If the player jumps on the log and continues to run sideways, the player has velocity in this direction. But there is a chance that before they can see the rock, they might go too far to turn around and escape it. So instead, as the player hits the log slides back to create a counter velocity, to slow the advance of the player. With the player not moving so fast in this direction, they get a chance to look at the oncoming boulder and interpret the situation. Then still have enough time to turn around and run back to safety. The sliding log also creates motion in this direction that hints to the player what the player should do. Okay, cool. Beat the boulder puzzle. Next puzzle. We just cruise along here and get to this pond. Now, if you are savvy, which considering you got to this part of the second video would indicate you probably are, you might have noticed these branches back here looking suspiciously like platforms. Good pickup. The pond is a small part of a larger puzzle that looks like this. This is the first puzzle where all the information we need isn't on the screen at once. The puzzle itself is fairly standard traversal stuff. You solve it like this. Pull the crate back here, jump up to the vine, letting you reach here, traverse these platforms, large log, broken. Daintiest version of This is Sparta, log falls down. Become a backtrack expert, push log into water, crate optional, jump on log, and then feel good about outsmarting a still pool of water. As said before, fairly standard traversal stuff, so let's dig into the polish. Let's talk about this pond. Lots of great nuggets of design here. Initially, if you miss everything and try to push the crate into the water, this distance is too far to jump. Yeah, okay, duh. If you push the crate in, however, after a point the crate will start to float back to the bank. This is so the player can't get into a situation where they don't have access to the crate. Next are the flies. We've already seen flies before on the carcass from the hidden bear trap puzzle, so we can associate them with dead stuff. We also might think of swamps or other foul things, just a gentle push towards the idea that the pond water is bad for you, both through visual and audio stimulus. On a similar note, there's a heap of stuff floating in the water that makes the stuff just look putrid and nasty. The developers could have just had an empty pool of water, but instead, they are feeding the player information through these subtle bits of polish, saying what they need the player to know. The crate and the vine are important. The player has to come over here and see what the obstacle to overcome is, that being the pond, before starting any of the puzzle elements. They can then drag the crate back and start. These platforms could have been lower, but then the player would have been pushing on this log just because it was there, and also might not understand that they need to backtrack in order to overcome the pond. I imagine there would have been a lot more jumping off here. The vine itself is swaying slightly in the wind. Humans are drawn to motion, so with everything else static and the vine swaying ever so slightly, the eye is drawn to it, which is conveniently the next step in the puzzle. The crate can't be pushed so far past the vine that the vine is out of shot. This makes sure the player knows the answer is to the right of here, and allows them to stop, reconsider, and see the motion of the vine. There's a secret here, hidden in the canopy for the keen of eye, basic traversal stuff. Over on the log, there is a very obvious structural weakness here. This makes it look like two distinct pieces. It's also on the outside, I imagine, to telegraph pushing the log over rather than pulling on it. Some nice splinters break off, just pleasant aesthetic polish, and that's about it. I've covered all the major points. Right, last puzzle. So we're just doing our thing, grayscale jogging in the forest, when we come across this. Creepy, hairy legs. This is the first mini-boss in the game. You can't really tell, but you can infer by the way the legs unfurled that this is a spider. And you would be right. This is a fairly simple boss, but again, it's a nice change of pacing. It is basically made up of 4 states. Waiting, where the spider is relaxed and waiting for you to come closer. Aiming, where the spider aims its strike by pointing its leg at the player. Winding up, where the spider draws its leg back and stops tracking the player, telegraphing an attack. And striking, the leg shoots out to try and impale the player. And these can be discovered by the player getting close to it and experimenting. So again, you might have noticed with your keen eyes that back here, there was a bear trap on a tree branch. This is an interesting one. It is needed for the boss, but the developers originally found that players would come across the bear trap and worry too much about it and not about what the spider was doing, then get confused when they couldn't understand how the boss worked. So instead, the developers put it in the branches. When the spider strikes, we hear a clang. And the bear trap moves a little. When the spider strikes a second time, we hear another clang. And if we go back, we now see the trap has fallen out of the tree. Having the trap in the tree forces the player to have to trigger the spider's attack 2 times before they can start to beat it. Hopefully by triggering the attack twice, the player will learn about how the spider moves, as understanding its movement is key to beating it. From here, we are able to push the trap down the hill and use it on the spider. If the player gets within range and then quickly leaves, the spider will return to waiting. So, the idea is to lure the spider into the winding up state, then slide the bear trap to where the player would have been, so the spider traps its leg. Do this 3 times and you beat it. After the 3rd leg is trapped, the spider decides to give up and flees into the trees. And, as it is no longer needed by the player, the trap breaks to avoid confusion. And as the bear trap breaks, we come to the last puzzle of the video, which is a puzzle for you guys to solve, which is why you haven't subscribed to my channel. Here on my channel, we discuss the ins and outs of game design so that you can discuss, analyze, and create better games. And by subscribing, you will be putting yourself in the firing line of a lot more game design content. If you want to help get this information about puzzle design in front of other people, you could also click the thumbs up